when are you looking to have this finished, and where would it be? And is this more for the? Do you think it'll actually air anywhere or be online, or more for is it for your PhD?
Oh, no. It does not relate to...
Doesn't? Oh, because you're not allowed to do subject interviews.
No!
Are you doing a PhD? I don't remember. No, I think you no. No,
No,
PhD.
I'm independent.
That's right.
You can ask me and I can tell you about
That's
it.
right.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, I don't know where it will end up. I can envision submitting it to film festivals and going that route. I can envision shopping for distributors and just seeing if I can get a company to pick it up and distribute it. That would be
I
lovely.
don't think there is any. I don't know of anything on polygraphs.
It's a pretty big lacuna in the, I mean, in several literatures, right? Because in the sort of spy literature, it's not true lies. And in the man is keeping you down literature, it's really not that cut and dry.
Yeah, I arranged for 60 Minutes to do a segment on polygraphs. I don't know if you ever saw that.
With George Mushke. And
Was George on it?
I think so. There were several wonderful folks who were on the anti-polygraph
We had
networks.
I had all the clients sit around. They cut me on the editing room floor, unfortunately. Terrible people. I can't remember when. I may have a transcript. I could probably get a transcript of it. I may even have a God knows where I have a broadcast. Maybe they can burn a CD or DVD for me. And I can get you a copy.
That would be lovely.
Actually, I should ask them.
Yeah, I looked for it on YouTube and couldn't find it.
Yeah, because it was probably too early before anybody was doing that.
Right, and the networks are really funny about pulling their stuff.
Yeah, I mean, 60 Minutes has a lot of stuff online, but I don't think they went that far back. I'll ask them. I think they did give me a DVD, but the problem is I have no idea where I would have put it.
Do a sound check real quick. Can you say something, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
This is not popping up where it should. Can we move that?
Do you want it up?
Yeah, well, I think the problem is that it's going into your shirt for some reason. I don't know. I hate to get it any more conspicuous, but it needs... There we go.
How's that? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Much
Testing.
better. Thank you. Okay.
All right, so
we were at a juncture. You can either tell me more about who's running the ship and who's going to make the changes that need to happen in terms of accountability and checks and balances and these things that you were talking about, or you can tell me about the drug law enforcement story before you forget.
Yeah, all right, why don't I do the latter since my short-term memory keeps fading. Well, a perfect example to show that even the agencies don't take this device as serious as they portray that it should be taken, is for people applying to be FBI agents. Very often they have a law enforcement background. They are members of federal law enforcement. They're DEA agents. They are ICE agents. Back in the day, they were immigration inspectors. They're local and state police officers and detectives currently while they're applying to be an FBI agent. And they sit for the polygraph. And they show deception on the drug question. So you have a sitting law enforcement officer who's registering deception, being accused of lying regarding their drug use, sales, purchase. Sometimes the question pertains to, have you ever used drugs as a law enforcement officer while serving as a law enforcement officer? Not necessarily on duty, but just you've been a cop for 8 years. Have you used drugs within the last 8 years? That's looked at much more unfavorably than if you had used it 5 years ago, but you didn't become a police officer until 3 years ago. Same thing with security clearances. If you had a drug history before you had a clearance, okay, that's something that can be dealt with. If you used drugs while you had a security clearance, is viewed completely differently. So, here you have some very important law enforcement officers, and again, sometimes DE agents. What's a DEA agent? Drug Enforcement Administration. People who are trying to prevent the sale and distribution of drugs, and they're being accused of using, buying, selling drugs. So what does the FBI do? Well, if the device worked, you would think that they would be reported to their home law enforcement institution. No, of course they're not. The FBI, and I'm picking on the FBI, no agency refers their test results on their own to the individual examinee's agency. Now, frankly, I actually would like to see that happen. Because if the device works and you're telling me this DEA agent is lying to you about drug use, then I want you to tell the DEA, and I want the DEA to do an investigation into this person. I mean, that would be the proper way to go. If you believe in this device, then take it to the full measure. They don't. That's a perfect example. I don't even know what their answer would be. Maybe this would be something to ask if you can ever get an agency official. Now, how is change going to be affected? Is a very tough problem. The problem with this is there's no constituency. There's no oversight. There is no one guarding the henhouse. There are thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, I'm sure, of polygraph examinations given nationwide every year. And X number of them have problems. But 2 of them were in this congressional district. 1 was in that congressional district. Maybe 4 were in this Senate district. Maybe 1,000 were in this Senate district, but only 2 of them contacted their senator. The Congress doesn't pay any attention because from a constituent standpoint, it's not worth their time. It's not worth their energy. They don't know enough about the device themselves because they believe it works too, because they only know what pop culture has told them for the most part. So that it doesn't rise to the level where you can energize an individual member of Congress to put themselves on the line for you, their constituent. Now, they may write a letter. Typically, this is what happens. Such and such person failed an FBI polygraph, lost out on the job. They're a member of law enforcement in their home district. They complain to their member of Congress, this is unfair, I never lied. Member of Congress writes a letter to the Legislative Affairs Office of the FBI. They get a letter back that says, this is how we do our program, such and yada, yada, yada. It doesn't say anything. They send the letter back to the constituent. Thank you, I wish we could have done more for you. I'm sorry. They don't have anything personalized at stake. They're not going to put their own reputation on the line, meaning the congressman. So it goes nowhere. And here, even with the testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee in 2001, which actually the majority of the witnesses, including the federal government witnesses, said there are problems with the polygraph. The deputy director of the Defense Department Polygraph Institute made it very clear that they wouldn't have caught Hansen, and as I recall, and that, look, there are problems and there needs to be safeguards, and they want to have safeguards. Jeff Smith, former CIA general counsel, testified to the horrors that existed in the wake of Aldrich Ames, where hundreds of CIA case officers' careers were held in limbo because they only had polygraph problems and the agency didn't know what to do with them, and how unfair that was. That was 8 years ago. Nothing has been done since by Congress. Nothing. What has happened? Agencies have expanded the use of their polygraphs. The National Academy of Sciences did a review of polygraphs. Had a lot of critical things to say about polygraphs, especially screening tests. Anybody do anything? No. No one. There's no groundswell. There's no union. There's no organized effort. There's a bunch of websites of dissatisfied victims, which frankly have actually contributed a great deal to helping people out. You wouldn't be able to measure how many people it's helped out, but it's helped people out. There's no doubt about it. But it's a small effort, and there's not much more, frankly, that can be done until, as in most things, and certainly in Washington, D.C., till something tragic happens, or till someone like J. Edgar Hoover or Secretary of Baker has a close confidant and friend or family member who has a problem with the polygraph, and it becomes an issue during that time. But it's temporally limited. The change in the State Department that I've witnessed in the last few years, I would probably state that it's derived from the fact that the generation has changed, has finally changed. Those that were in power in the department in the early 80s have finally worked their way, or even started at the bottom under this policy, have now worked their way through and for the most part are on their way out. And you have this new generation who haven't had the negative, adverse impact and are in a position of power to do something, so its use is growing once again. So I'm saddened to say I don't see much in the way of change coming about until something radical happens or until some major effort by an organized group, whether an ACLU type organization or just someone who decides they're going to create such an organization and somehow can mobilize fundraising and outreach and grassroots effort. One thing when anybody would contact me, I would always say, you need to write to your member of Congress and you need to identify to them that you are not alone. There are countless victims and you want them to hold hearings. You want them to hold public hearings so that this can be looked at. But again, we've done the hearings and it happens every 10, 15 years. There were hearings in the late 70s, there were hearings in the late 80s, there were hearings in the early 2000s. I mean, literally every 10 to 15 years, this issue comes up, again, because it's generational. And it comes up and it fades. Now, when it came up in the 80s, it led to the passage of the Employer Protection Act, Polygraph Protection Act, but it only applied to non-federal government. Great, in their infinite wisdom, they exempted the entities that used it the most and who really should be held accountable the greatest, because if anyone should be held accountable to an objective standard, it's the government, whatever governmental level there is. It's the government that should be setting the example of what fairness is, of what integrity is. And if the government's abusing the process, then what example does that set for everybody else? I mean, we're hearing all these things about and listening today, the SEC not doing its job, and so people like Madoff flouting his ability to run circles around the SEC because they were fools, and it was easy to do. Well, the same thing in the polygraph process. If there's no one watching the hen house, then the foxes are going in, and that's the state of the polygraph industry in the federal, or usage in the federal government, unfortunately right now. I remember when I deposed the director of DODPI, which again has another name now that I keep forgetting. What's it called? DACA. Character, was it character assessment?
Yeah, exactly.
Something.
Defense Academy for
Credibility assessment.
Credibility assessment, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so DACA. When I deposed the then director of DODPI, now DACA. Very nice guy. And after the exam, after my deposition, he came up to me and he said, you know, you don't have to answer this question, but there's a document that's now up on antipolygraph.org that came from us, that is part of the discovery that we released. And, you know, we're wondering just how it got there. Well, you don't have to wonder. I mean, I gave it to them. And he's like, oh, you know, I wish you hadn't done that. And it was a document that talked about the fallacy of the device. And it went to the heart of the culture of, you know, if you realize it doesn't work in the manner in which it's being portrayed to work, then you can prepare yourself for the exam. And they'll be less likely to garner an admission of some sort of incriminatory behavior. And I mean, it was a very interesting conversation, and the government attorney for the Justice Department, when she realized what was going on with this conversation, shut him down and told him to stop talking to me about this. And it was because he was revealing to me the actual fallacy of the device that we were trying to get at in the litigation. That if the people understand the truth, then the device doesn't work. Doesn't work in the manner in which it's used. And this was discovery. I mean, I could do whatever I want with it. It wasn't classified information or protected. There was responses to document production. It was, you know, give me your training materials. And not everything was releasable, but what was, there was some fascinating information, and it's out there. And, you know, hopefully now people will learn. And again, it comes down to the accountability. You know, I never will instruct anyone how to beat a polygraph. It's not about beating a polygraph. It's not about using countermeasures. And countermeasures, I would never and never do. In fact, I counsel people, do not even make it seem that you're using countermeasures. Don't fidget. Don't control your breathing in any way. Even because it can be all perceived as countermeasures, and if you're accused of countermeasures, you're dead in the water. Because how are you going to contradict the examiner's perception that you used countermeasures? You can't. The examiner says you used countermeasures, that's the end of the story, whether you did or didn't. It's not about beating the device, it's about understanding the test. If you understand the test, you can get through it. Or at least you can get through it with the most minimal impact. Now, you may not be able to pass the acceptable parameters for the FBI or whomever. You may not get the job, but at least you're not going to say something that's going to be used against you and will follow you. Because if you just fell outside of acceptable parameters, odds are you're just going to lose that job and that's it. But if you make some admission that you did X, Y, or Z, and X, Y, or Z is a problem, well, now you very well may have lost out on quite a number of jobs. And you may, in fact, lose your current job, depending on what you admitted to. And so it's understanding the limitations of the device and the limitations of, quite frankly, the examiner. It's training someone to be as skillful as the examiner in dealing with interview sessions, and which most people lack because they're not informed. So will that change? I don't know. I'd have to say my DC years of now of which are approaching 20 of dealing with the U.S. government, I don't see anything in the near future changing, which isn't to say that it can't, and it's certainly not to say that it shouldn't, because it does need to.
Okay, give me one more muddy quote if you can on
Yep.
the differential impact of this. You said something earlier about how different cultures, and you were very careful to couch this in general terms, and I respect that caution. But you said, for example, that Mormons are better able to pass. Are there any groups that we have data suggesting, or that you have, any information suggesting that certain groups may be disproportionately penalized by the polygraph?
I don't know if there are studies. I'm trying to think of anything more than anecdotal or sociological.
There was the Gordon Barland study.
Did they? Yeah, I just can't. And I think I dealt with Gordon. He's at Utah, right? Yeah, he gave me a declaration actually. Do you have that?
Not on me, no.
No, but have you seen it? I think I mean, it would be publicly available.
What I have is his 1990 Dodd P research.
Okay, I have to just shoot me an email to look for it. I'm pretty sure he gave me a sworn declaration that I used in the case, because this in Barland is if it's the same guy I'm thinking of, one of the primary DoD researchers. I mean, for the government, on the government side. But his research is all about specific incident tests. It's not screening, and he didn't favor screening tests. He was very leery of them, and again, because that's what the lawsuit was all about. He was very willing, after I spoke to him, that he gave me a declaration about it. So a lot of it's anecdotal and just understanding guilt, whether it's Jewish guilt or Catholic guilt about any number of things. And it's always been said, again, you look at it from, it's all about physiological responses. And whether it's guilt or just sensitivity, there's a problem with sensitizing people to an exam. So that when you fail or fall outside of acceptable parameters of an FBI polygraph on the drug question but make no admissions, you can ask for a retest. And oftentimes you'll get a retest. Now, on that retest, you have an opportunity to hopefully be able to quell the problems that existed, but more likely, because you know you had problems with the drug question the first time around, and there's only 5 to 7 questions on any given test, you're going to be asked the drug question again, and so what are you sensitized to? You're sensitized to, oh my God, the drug question's coming up. And human nature, your pulse rate's going to increase and your breathing's going to deepen. And you're going to get a little nervous because you know the question that's stopping you from realizing your dream is just about to come up. Or I had clients who stayed away from drugs their entire life. They only ever wanted to be an FBI agent. And when it came to the drug question, like, oh my God, what if I fail the drug? I mean, they psyched themselves out so that they made themselves so nervous for it. And again, is nervousness lying? No, both nervousness and lying theoretically create the same physiological responses. But the problem is, again, for interpretation, we don't know in looking at the charts. Are they nervous or are they lying? Now, again, if you look at it from a cultural standpoint, all these Cuban double agents that came forward in the 80s, it wasn't necessarily that they were trained how to beat a polygraph. Ames has a story where he called his Soviet handlers because he was scheduled to take a periodic reinvestigation poly. And he said, well, what you guys must have these countermeasures and these trainings that you've done. And the Soviet handler was like, no, just go in and be relaxed. Don't worry about it. Just don't think about it. I mean, there wasn't even these specific or hard-lined drop pills that would make it appear that you were telling the truth, or all sorts of stuff. I mean, there are little tricks that people say about countermeasures that I won't repeat on here because I don't know if they work or not, and I wouldn't suggest them anyway. But when you had the key people who were concerned about it, spies, double agents, even then they were just saying, no, just relax. I have had a client recently he's facing a DEA polygraph that's coming up, and he had failed a bureau polygraph twice. And he told the DEA polygrapher that. He had problems with And that's one of the questions they ask. Have you ever taken a polygraph before? Because one, they want to know maybe you made an admission. They want to go look at the file. That's fine. And two, maybe there's going to be an issue. Or three, maybe we're not going to give you another polygraph because, hey, you failed that one, so why bother? If it works there, it should work here. So failed the Bureau polygraph, going to take the DEA polygraph, and he expressed some concern that how the initial tests are going to impact this subsequent test. And the DEA polygrapher's advice was, look, just get a good night's sleep, have a good breakfast in the morning, and come in nice and relaxed, and you'll be fine. And I had to respond back, that sounds like very good advice. Don't put Tabasco sauce on your eggs. Don't cause anything that's going to cause your stomach to be a problem. Have a nice, mellow, non-acidic breakfast, and go in relaxed. That's probably the best, and keep your mouth shut. Is probably the best advice as to how to deal with these polygraph examinations. What else would you want me to hit?
Well, do you think there could be a negative impact to systematically closing out people who are so nervous that they want to get everything 100% right? I mean, it seems like some of the people who were special agents like Mark Mala, or who wanted to be special, like George Matschke, who were really very much embedded in military intelligence as careers and really very fastidious people, is there a systematic bias against people who don't want to make mistakes?
Well, it's an interesting concept that would bring in psychology and sociology and all sorts of human factors to identify the type of person that handles a certain type of job. I probably can't answer this question directly because I don't know the answer other than I can identify that this is partly where some of the research really needs to take place, or a realization needs to be understood within the polygraph community that, frankly, to be an intelligence analyst, to be a police officer, typically, as a general rule, involves a certain type of character, a certain type of personality. And some of the characteristics that would be of most benefit and grant strength to that person's success in that field may actually be counterindicative or contrary to a polygraph examination. They may actually directly work against each other. And that's not going to be something you can generalize. It's going to be very case and fact specific. But I mean, I've had intelligence officers, it doesn't have anything to do with the poly, but intelligence officers that, depending on who you talk to, they are the best case officer they have ever seen, and they want, if they had a choice as to who they wanted to watch their back, this is the individual that they would choose. You then go then talk to someone else, and they feel that this person is the most reckless person who would stab you in the back at any given time, and they don't want anything to do with this person. Same person, same style, same tactics, completely two different perceptions as to the strengths or weaknesses of this particular person. And the polygraph is very much like that. And that's the problem. And again, it's not the polygraph. It's the manner in which the device is used. It's sort of like you can't blame the polygraph. The polygraph isn't doing anything. Polygraph is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's how it's used. Is nuclear weapons good or nuclear weapons bad? I guess it depends on how you use it.
Well, and that's a fascinating point, because we have an international relations deterrence theory is, sort of all the rage, and it says that when people have nuclear weapons, when countries have nuclear weapons, the world is safer because we have mutually assured destruction. So we're not gonna, step on Russia's toes.
Or if you want to bring it down to earth a little bit, so it's not some grandiose thing, if you look at the death penalty. Is the death penalty a deterrent or not? And the debate is really, is it a general deterrent? Can you measure it to be a general deterrent? Can you measure it to be that the existence of the death penalty led that person robbing the bank not to shoot the guard because they were concerned they were going to have the death penalty applied versus not? That's up for grabs. Probably not. I think the research has probably shown general deterrent, you really can't use it. Is it a specific deterrent? Yeah, it's a very good specific deterrent. If you apply the death penalty to somebody, they're not going to kill anyone after that. So you can say it's a specific deterrent for sure. It's a great one. Best one ever. Well, now, okay, you have to look at, did you use the device? Again, the device is the electric chair, the gallows, the poison gas, whatever you want to say. Is that the evil versus those that are using it? And you can, again, you got to get past moral issues, of course, which don't exist for the polygraph. But if you're beyond the moral issue, are you willing to take a life or not of a very bad person? The question then really comes down to what exists for the polygraph is accountability, making sure of its accuracy. Is that the person who did kill the guard? Is there a question? If there's not a question and you're beyond the moral issues of death or life, if that's the person absolutely killed the guard, I mean, if they're on the video, they turned to the video, they said their name and they laughed. You know what? Okay, then maybe that's the person you give the death penalty to. There are some people in this world that are just bad people because they're made that way or turned that way, who knows? But if there's a question, then obviously you can't call back the specific deterrent of the execution. So it's the administration of the death penalty that's the problem, not necessarily the death penalty per se. Same thing with the polygraph. That may be an exaggerated analogy, but it's not the administration of the test itself, but it's those who are possibly administering it, or it's the results of the administration. Now, in this sense, obviously, no one you survive it, presumably, but it has this impact that follows you, much in the way a death penalty would, at a different level, of course. Although I have a case now, actually, we just filed yesterday, where the accusation, was she polygraphed? I'm trying to think if she was on the poly. She ended up having a miscarriage as a result of intense interrogation, but I can't remember if it was a polygraph or not. Actually, I don't think it was, but it was an interrogation. But that's a perfect example of it. It's not even the device. It's the interrogation. It's the manner in which the questions are being asked, the tone, the tenor, the relationship between the examiner. Is it a good cop or a bad cop type attitude that will impact, that person who's being subjected to the interviews. So, I mean, there's a lot of research that really still needs to exist, and again, the majority of the research for polygraphs is specific use. It's not screening. Yet, I have a feeling, and I don't know if the stats are accurate, something to obviously verify, that at least in the federal government, it's screening tests that are being used far, far more than a specific incident test. And yet, sad to say, there's no studies to back it up, as admitted by the government's own witnesses. So again, if we kind of circle back around to what steps can we take, where do the checks and balances need to be implemented or put into place, it has to do with the screening tests. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, are the screening tests. Because even historically, the ads that I was talking about, how polygraphs were being used. So is this the closest shave? Spouse, wives, is your husband cheating? It's all specific incident. It's all the notion that, well, if you're shown a bloody knife and you had seen it before, you will react to that knife, versus you're innocent and you're shown a knife you've never seen before, and there's no reason why that would register. But again, if you think of just human nature, if you're being accused of committing a violent crime and you're shown a bloody knife, and you're realizing, oh my God, that's the murder weapon, and they're accusing me, you know, what's going to happen? Your heart rate's going to go up, your breathing's going to escalate, you're going to start sweating. I mean, if you're a normal person, you are, at the very least. If you're a cold, calculated killer who doesn't care about what society thinks or does to you, maybe you won't. But, I mean, again, that's what it comes down to. It's not the device that's bad. As Jessica Rabbit said, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way.
Excellent.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Oh, that's it.